The late afternoon sun painted the cul-de-sac in gold, but the scene unfolding was anything but beautiful. A young black mother stood at the edge of her driveway, clutching grocery bags in both hands, her little boy clinging to her leg. A small tricycle lay tipped over at her feet, the plastic wheels spinning helplessly in the heat, and across from her, on the sidewalk, stood the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, the HOA president everyone whispered about. Karen. Arms crossed, chin tilted upward, sunglasses hiding eyes that gleamed with cruelty. "You people think you can bring down the value of this neighborhood with your clutter?" She sneered loudly enough for the surrounding porches to hear. Her voice cut through the air like broken glass. The clutter she referred to? A chalk drawing of flowers and stars that the little boy had sketched on the driveway with his neon sticks. Harmless, joyful, innocent. Karen didn't see innocence. She saw defiance. Neighbors peeked from behind blinds, some smirking, some recording. Not one stepped forward. Karen pulled out her phone, snapping pictures of the chalk art as if documenting a crime scene. Then she pointed at the child. "If this mess isn't gone in an hour, I'll fine you. And if you don't pay, I'll start foreclosure." "Rules are rules," the mother's hands trembled. She wanted to speak, but years of warnings, fines, and subtle harassment had taught her that any word would be twisted against her. Her silence was mistaken for weakness, and Karen smiled wider. A bag slipped from the mother's hand, oranges rolling across the driveway. Laughter broke out from a nearby porch. Karen leaned in closer, her perfume sickly sweet, her words venomous. "Maybe you don't belong here." The boy's eyes widened, confused, frightened. The mother bent to gather her groceries, shame burning her cheeks. The queen of the cul-de-sac strutted away, confident, untouchable. But what she didn't know, what no one could have guessed, was that this quiet, humiliated woman had a brother. And he wasn't just anyone. He was a Navy SEAL. Karen moved quickly, feeding off her own cruelty like it was oxygen. An official violation notice was taped to the mother's front door within hours. The paper screamed in bold letters, "Unauthorized defacement of property. A $500 fine. Threat of escalation." A line in red, "Failure to comply may result in a lien or foreclosure." By the next HOA meeting, Karen had already spun her narrative. Standing at the front of the clubhouse, under glittering chandeliers and beside a table stacked with binders, she wore a tailored blazer like a crown. Her smile was rehearsed, her tone dripping with false concern. "Residents," she said smoothly, "we have a serious issue. Graffiti has begun to appear on driveways. If we don't stop it now, this place will look like a slum." Gasps from the crowd. Nods from the board. A retired colonel muttered, "Shameful." Karen held up printed photographs, the boy's chalk flowers, enlarged and distorted in color to look menacing. "This is what I'm talking about. Property values could plummet. We can't allow exceptions. Rules protect us all." A chorus of approval followed. The mother sat quietly at the back, her son coloring silently in a notebook beside her. Karen's allies, seated like courtiers, smirked in unison. The property manager said, "Yes, multiple residents have complained." A lie. But nobody questioned him. Even the security officer nodded, adding, "I've received calls about disturbances." Another lie layered onto the pile. Karen continued, her voice rising theatrically. "I understand some people feel targeted. But this isn't about race or personal feelings. It's about order. It's about standards." The hypocrisy was staggering. The mother clenched her hands together. Her silence was interpreted as guilt. The board looked at her like she was the problem, not the victim. Karen leaned into her performance, weaving every word with venom masked as policy. If she can't control her child, perhaps this isn't the right neighborhood for her, the crowd murmured. Approval. Agreement. The woman sat alone, humiliated, her neighbors complicit in cruelty. By the end of the meeting, the board voted unanimously to uphold the fine. Karen beamed like a conquering general. She strutted past the mother, heels clicking against polished tile, whispering loudly, "Rules are rules." The mother remained silent, but her humiliation cut deep. And Karen believed she had won yet again. The harassment escalated. Each day, a new violation notice appeared. Unauthorized toys in the yard for a tricycle. Improper landscaping for a flower bed planted with care. Noise disturbance for the boys' laughter on a summer afternoon. The fines stacked higher. Threatening letters warned of liens, of court, of foreclosure. Neighbors began to avoid her, fearful of becoming Karen's next target. Whispers filled the air. She doesn't belong here. She's bringing trouble. Why doesn't she just move? The HOA meetings became public trials. Karen would stride to the front, binder in hand, spinning fiction into fact. We've had multiple complaints about this resident. She's disruptive. She's lowering our standards. Allies nodded. The property manager produced doctored photos. A lawn slightly overgrown, shadows that looked like trash. The security guard claimed he'd witnessed arguments that never happened. The mother sat in silence, eyes downcast as the lies stacked against her like bricks in a wall. Karen's smirk grew wider with every meeting. She reveled in her power, her ability to twist the truth, to manipulate a crowd into siding with her cruelty. She believed herself untouchable. The boy asked his mother why the neighbors were angry. She held him close, unable to answer. Threats of foreclosure loomed larger. Karen whispered to others, "Soon enough, she'll be gone. I'll make sure of it." The crowd nodded, complicit. The mother seemed cornered, powerless, her dignity trampled in the dirt. And Karen? She looked unstoppable. But what the queen of the cul-de-sac didn't know was that the mother wasn't alone. Her brother had been watching, and he was about to remind the neighborhood what real power looked like. The night of the final hearing arrived like a storm that had learned to walk on 2 feet. The clubhouse glowed too brightly, chandeliers polished until they threw shards of light across the lacquered floor. Chairs were set in neat rows, every one of them filled. Neighbors leaned forward. Phones hovered above laps. At the front of the room, Karen stood behind a draped table like a queen about to knight herself. The board flanked her, a row of polite smiles and pearl necklaces. Their binders stacked high as if height alone proved truth. The mother took her usual place near the back, hands folded around her son's fingers. She was dressed, pressed blouse, hair pinned back, eyes steady with the kind of calm that arrives after the worst has already been endured. The boy held a worn little notebook of crayons. He'd drawn a tiny rocket ship in the margin, its crayon flame lifting off toward a paper moon. And then the door opened. He entered without ceremony. No swagger, no noise, just a measured stride as quiet as the space between heartbeats. Broad-shouldered, clean-cut, suit crisp but unshowy. His face was the kind that had learned to conserve expression, to spend it only when necessary. His gaze swept the room once, noting exits, corners, angles, and distances. It was the kind of scan you couldn't learn from a book. He took the chair beside his sister. She squeezed his hand, and her shoulders softened by a fraction for the first time in weeks. Karen clocked the addition, an unfamiliar man, alert posture, the hush he brought in with him, and decided to ignore it. Karen clicked her mic on. "Good evening. Due to repeated violations," she lifted a glossy photo of chalk flowers stretched into grotesque color, "and a pattern of non-compliance, the board will finalize the lien and proceed toward foreclosure unless immediate corrective action is taken." Nods. Murmurs. A neighbor stage whispered, "About time." The property manager slid forward a binder labeled Incidents in gold foil. The security officer folded his arms, chin up. They were ready for the same performance they'd polished for months. The man at the back stood, not rushed, not dramatic. He just stood as if responding to a quiet internal timer that had reached 0. He walked the aisle with the balanced cadence of a person who knows exactly where his feet are landing. The room stiffened without knowing why. Karen tilted her chin, annoyed. He stopped at the table, placed a slim portfolio on the cloth, and opened it with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. First, a credential card. The hovering phones lowered an inch as every nearby eye tried to focus at once. The card wasn't a business pass nor a visitor badge. It carried an eagle and a trident, a name, a rank. The room absorbed it in waves. Those who knew understood immediately. Those who didn't felt the understanding in everyone else's bodies. The letters were small, but the meaning was not. Karen's practiced smile pinched. "Sir, this is a private—" He placed a second item, a letter on heavy paper, watermark faint under the chandelier's glare. The signature at the bottom belonged to an attorney whose jurisdiction outran cul-de-sacs. Phrases lifted like steel beams from the page. Federal protections, reasonable accommodation, preemption, retaliatory enforcement. The property manager's pen stopped clicking. Next. A sealed envelope stamped with a crest that didn't conform to the bylaws. The kind of envelope you don't open so much as obey. On the seal, a number. A case file that had begun breathing somewhere far above this ceiling. A ripple moved through the audience, whispers thinning, spines straightening. The boy squeezed his mother's hand and leaned in. She bent so her cheek brushed his hair. Then, the final piece, a compact drive, is set gently on the cloth like a fuse laid where it could be seen. The man met Karen's eyes for the first time. Calm, collected, untouchable. "Who are you?" Karen asked, laughter riding too high on her voice. He spoke softly, every syllable tuned. "I'm her brother." Silence took the room by the throat. He touched the credential with one finger. "United States Navy, seal, no brag, no flourish." Just the fact, placed in the center of the table like a compass, suddenly made every previous map look like a crayon. He turned the letter so the board could read it. "You've been told repeatedly in writing that her son's chalk drawings weren't graffiti. You were made aware that your fines and threats and your pattern of selective enforcement collide directly with federal housing protections. You proceeded anyway." Karen tried for a smirk and found her mouth didn't remember how. "We follow our bylaws." He nodded, not agreeing, but acknowledging the words he had expected to hear. "Your bylaws are not a shield against the law." He tapped the sealed envelope. "This is an open inquiry. Your emails, minutes, incident reports, and footage retention policies are now subject to review." The security officer adjusted his belt, gaze skittering away. The property manager swallowed. A woman in the second row crossed herself without knowing she had. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He slid a printed timeline across the table, a clean ledger connecting each violation to a meeting where his sister had questioned a broken gate, an overcharge, a misapplied fee. The retaliation drew itself in ink. No commentary required. Karen lifted her gavel as if it were still magic. "This is intimidation." He considered the gavel, the table, the faces. His eyes were steady pools. "No, this is accountability." He turned to the room, not as a performer, but as a witness. "For months, you watched a black mother harassed for a child's chalk flowers. You watched fines multiply because it was easier to nod than to notice. You believed a binder over your own eyes. Phones were down now. No one wanted to blink." He rested a hand on his sister's shoulder. "That ends tonight." He clicked the drive into a laptop. On the screen, the truth began to walk out of the shadows. The first clip froze the room. Karen's jaw slackened. A few seats back, someone whispered, "Oh!" The Navy SEAL didn't look at the screen. He watched the people watching. That was where the power shifted. Quietly, finally, permanently. And when the first recording ended, he offered the only mic drop required. "You said rules are rules. Good. Let's follow the real ones," the speakers hummed. The room braced. He pressed play, clip 1, a hallway outside the boardroom. Two board members, unaware of a nearby door camera, paused mid-laugh. One voice, unmistakably Karen's, said, "Stack the fines until she sells. I'm tired of looking at her projects and that kid's chalk garbage." Smug and low, the other voice said, "We'll make her move." Laughter. Then the staccato tap of heels down tile. A gasp rippled, sharp and involuntary. Someone's phone slipped, thudding against the carpet. Clip 2, security footage from the mother's porch. Time-stamped for the evening, Karen had cited noise disturbances and public nuisance. The boy was asleep on a blanket near the doorway. The mother quietly waters plants. A night so still you could hear the whisper of crickets. No disturbance. No nuisance. The silence was louder than any shout. Clip 3. An email chain projected behind Karen's head like a confession reprinted in the sky. The property manager typing, "We should increase pressure. Non-compliance fees X3. She'll fold eventually." Karen replying, "Perfect." Keep incident reports vague, just resident complaints. The property manager went pale. The security officer stared at his shoes. The audience shifted slowly, shame touching each face in turn. "Context," Karen blurted, hands fluttering. "You're twisting clip 4, a board Zoom recording." Taking a sip from a wine glass, Karen said with a grin, "We can't let standards slide. If we start making exceptions for people like—" She didn't finish the sentence on the call. She didn't need to. The pause did the speaking. The board's silence swelled around it like protection. The seal let the still frame hang. No narration. No scolding. The gravity did its own work. He placed a neat stack of printed logs beside the laptop. Phone records corroborate the timeline of anonymous complaints with the personal numbers of board members and their immediate social circle. IP traces on forum posts linked to your home router. He slid the documents closer. Your words, your devices, your dates. Karen's allies began to bleed away. The security officer cleared his throat. "I was following instructions." The property manager whispered, "I'll cooperate." A board member in pearls removed her name badge as if it were a hot coin and set it face down. The seal looked at none of them. He kept his gaze on Karen. "You told a mother she didn't belong in the neighborhood her mortgage pays for. You threatened her child's drawings. You threatened her home." Karen tried for indignation. "We enforce standards, you enforce prejudice," he said evenly. "And when challenged, you hide behind paperwork and the word rules as if it were holy." He didn't raise his voice. He raised receipts. Exhibit A, a letter from the city's civil rights office acknowledging a pattern review. Exhibit B, a legal opinion clarifying that chalk art on private driveways, especially by minors, is not vandalism but protected expression, not subject to HOA graffiti codes. Exhibit C, witness statements from neighbors who had kept quiet, now spoken aloud. "I saw her watering plants that night. The child never disturbed anyone. Karen said she'd clean up the street if it meant forcing certain families out." The room moved, from murmurs to a hush that felt like a verdict taking shape of its own accord. Karen's smirk didn't just fade. It collapsed. Her hands shook as she reached for the gavel and found it suddenly too heavy. She knocked it once, twice. The sound landed dull, like wood against wet cloth. The seal's tone never drifted from composed. "You've also violated your own bylaws by issuing fines without proper notice and by blocking appeal requests. Here are the meeting minutes where appeals were tabled without vote. Here are the drafts of newsletters that accused my sister of defacement before any motion was passed." He looked to the board, not to humiliate but to pin. "You all signed these." A board member started to cry. Another stood abruptly and stepped away from the table as if the floor had tilted. The property manager whispered, "I wasn't comfortable, but—" and then stopped, because cowardice had run out of grammar. He played clip 5. At a private coffee shop with a real estate agent, Karen voices low and giddy. "If we get her out, I have a buyer. Full ask. It'll be cleaner." The agent, cautious but complicit, said, "Just make sure the file looks clean." The seal turned to the crowd. "This is how gentrification hides in plain sight. It smiles and says standards while it erases people with paperwork." He returned to the screen. Clip 6, doorbell footage of the boy kneeling on the driveway, chalk dust on his fingers, drawing flowers with indecent seriousness, the tenderness of a child making a gift for his mother. In the background, Karen's shadow crosses the sidewalk. She pauses, takes a photo, and types. The timestamp aligns precisely with the anonymous complaint, filed minutes later. The seal looked down at the boy, who watched his little hands on the screen, confused but calm. "You," he said softly, "did nothing wrong." Then he addressed Karen. Quiet, surgical. "Your words were your own. Your sneer was your own. Your pattern is your own. Here's what comes next. The fines are rescinded. The lien is void. The threats are documented as retaliation tied to protected class harassment. The city and state are notified. Your insurer will receive a full packet. Karen's voice cracked. You can't. He slid the sealed envelope forward. We already did. A slow shock traveled the room. Board members stared at the envelope as if it hissed. A neighbor in the back whispered, "Oh my God!" Another whispered, "We let this happen." Someone began to clap. One person, then another, then a shiver of applause that the room didn't quite know how to perform. Nervous, halting real, the seal raised a hand. The room fell silent. He wasn't finished. He lifted a final page. Her own words, transcribed, will make her move. He set it atop the stack with the care of a headstone being placed. "Karen, you wanted a clean neighborhood?" he said, voice low as a closing door. "Let's start by cleaning the board." Suddenly, the microphone was a stranger to Karen and picked up the slightest sound, her breath catching. In the space where her confidence used to live, only panic remained. And with that, her empire of binder clips and bile began to collapse under the exact weight of the truth she'd mocked. News does not knock, it pours in under doors. Within a week, the clip of Karen laughing about people like had more views than the neighborhood's residents. Headlines flowered: HOA president targets black mother over child's chalk art. Navy SEAL brother exposes plot. The story climbed local feeds, then regional broadcasts, then national segments where anchors wore somber expressions and panels used phrases like weaponized bureaucracy and disparate impact. The board canceled 2 meetings in a row. The property manager resigned via an email that thanked the community for the opportunity without naming anyone. The security officer requested reassignment, citing stress. Karen vanished behind a lawyer's door that swung often and never fully closed. The real estate agent scrubbed their business page and posted a statement about values that read like a confession, proofread by fear. Investigations widened. Subpoenas went out for emails, minutes, and forum admin logs. Patterns emerged in neon. Fines weighted toward families of color, appeals denied without a vote, anonymous complaints birthed at the same 2 IP addresses. The Civil Rights Office issued a preliminary report that read like rainwashing dust into rivulets, clear lines from petty cruelty to structural harm. Reforms followed not as apologies, but as blueprints. The city passed an ordinance tethering HOA enforcement to a published Residents' Bill of Rights, posted in every clubhouse, available in multiple languages, and presented annually at mandatory trainings. Disputes implicating protected classes are now diverted automatically to an independent panel trained in fair housing and bias mitigation. Insurers updated policies. Boards without certified compliance officers would see premiums surge or coverage drop. The soft power of habit congealed into the hard edge of requirement. Past cases reopened. Fines melted like frost. A veteran down the block saw his wheelchair ramp approved a day after months of design review. A single mother got refunds, money. She had paid in terror, plus interest, and an apology that sounded human, not corporate. A grandfather who'd removed a cultural wreath from his door hung it again. This time, a neighbor said, "It looks beautiful," and meant it. The forum that once amplified rumors began pinning resources instead. How to file an appeal, know your rights, bias training schedule. The old whisper networks lost oxygen. Sunlight arrived and stayed. As for Karen, the queen of standards, her kingdom shrank to a set of dates circled on a court docket. She resigned. The board elected a slate of new faces who spoke softly and wrote carefully. Their first act was to hire an ombudsperson with a separate budget and a mandate to tell the truth even when no one wanted to hear it. The neighborhood changed posture. Less gavel, more guardrail. Less theater, more transparency. It was not utopia. It was better. Accountable. And the mother? She took her son to the driveway one soft evening. The boy knelt, chalk dust blooming around his fingers. He drew a large flower that crossed the concrete seam and kept going, petals unfurling into a sunburst. A neighbor paused, watched, and then crouched to trace a petal of his own. The seal stood back in the shade, hands in his pockets, scanning nothing. For once there was nothing to scan. The world had not become perfect, but it had shifted. Enough that a child's drawing no longer read as defiance but as home. The mother spoke at the following community forum. No chandeliers, no costumes, just folding chairs and fluorescent lights. Not as a defendant, but as a resident whose voice finally weighed what it always should have. She stood at the front, palms resting on the table's edge. Karen's empty nameplate lay face down in a box near the door. The room, full but quiet, waited. "You told me to know my place," she said, looking at the space where Karen used to sit. "You told me rules are rules. You told me I didn't belong." She inhaled, slow and steady. "Here's my place, raising my son in peace. Here are the rules, the ones that protect families from harassment dressed as policy. Here is what belonging looks like. Neighbors who stand up when they see harm, not just when they hear applause." Her voice didn't tremble. It carried warm and precise. "For months I was silent because I thought silence would keep us safe. I thought if I stayed small, the storm would pass. But bullies don't retreat from silence. They feed on it." She glanced toward her brother. He gave nothing but a nod, the kind that says, "I'm here, but this is yours. I want something simple," she continued. "A place where a child's chalk is not a crime scene, where standards don't mean some people, where power is measured by how it protects, not by how loudly it punishes." She turned to the crowd, the ones who had watched, the ones who had helped, the ones who had hidden. "This isn't just my story. It belongs to anyone who has been fined into fear, anyone who has been shamed into quiet, anyone whose dignity has been treated like a line item. If that was you, stand with me now, and not just with applause. Stand with policy, with process, with the truth written down where everyone can see it." She faced the front again. "And to the woman who told me I didn't belong, you were right about one thing. I do need to know my place. My place is here, making sure what you did never happens again to any family on any street." The room stood, not roaring and not chanting, just rising, a wall of quiet that felt like strength, finally getting its bearings. The seal remained seated a beat longer, then stood as well, not in front of his sister, but beside her, where he had always been. The lesson settled like a verdict. True power belongs to justice, not cruelty. And justice, once awake, doesn't sleep. In the end, there was no dramatic gavel, no cinematic zoom. Just a moving truck at dawn that didn't stop at the mother's house, and another 2 weeks later that did stop at Karen's. A cardboard crown packed into a box. A name removed from a plaque. An empire reduced to receipts and regrets. The fines vanished. The lien dissolved. The policies changed. The boys' flowers multiplied, dozens, bright as little suns across the driveway. Sometimes neighbors added petals. Sometimes they said their names. Closure wasn't thunder. It was a quiet day, and it was finally right. If this story made you feel something, anger at the cruelty, pride at the courage, relief at the outcome, don't. Let it end here. Share this story if you believe in justice. Amplify. It's so the next family that faces a paper bully knows they're not alone. Like this video, if you stand against corruption, the petty kind and the powerful kind, wherever it hides in fine print and forced, smiles. Subscribe for more stories where courage defeats cruelty, dignity outlasts intimidation, and truth, steady, patient, relentless, wins. Because in this neighborhood, on this street, on this driveway, a simple truth just rewrote the rules. Justice always wins.